He had been a cop for over a decade, and every day on the streets felt like a test of patience, skill, and sometimes luck. The city was alive with chaos in its own way. People moving, honking cars, street vendors calling out, children laughing, and at the same time, there was a layer of darkness, a hidden side that most people never saw. He had seen it all. The petty thefts, the arguments that escalated too fast, the fights that left people bruised and broken. But he always believed that his presence mattered, that the uniform he wore made a difference, that even if it was just one life saved, it was enough. He was on his usual patrol when a call came in over the radio. Another fight, this time at a corner store that had been robbed a week ago. The details were sketchy, but he could tell from the urgency in the dispatcher's voice that this was no ordinary scuffle. As he drove through the familiar streets, he thought about how every day was unpredictable. No matter how routine a patrol seemed, the city had a way of throwing the unexpected at you. He parked his car a few blocks away and walked towards the store, keeping his eyes open, watching, listening. When he arrived, he saw a small crowd gathered, whispering and pointing. There were no obvious signs of injury, but tension hung in the air. He approached the store cautiously, his hand near his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. Inside, the clerk looked shaken but unharmed. The man behind the counter explained that a young man had come in, demanding money, and when the clerk hesitated, he pushed over some shelves and ran off. There was no weapon, but the aggression was clear. It wasn't the first time he had dealt with such a situation, and he knew from experience that small incidents could often be part of something much bigger. He took notes, asked questions, and looked around the area. There were security cameras, but the angle was poor, the footage grainy. Still, he had a feeling, a gut instinct, that there was more to this than a simple robbery. Something about the way the suspect moved, that he couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered in the past days. The city had many layers, and he had uncovered one that pulsed quietly but dangerously. Every detail mattered, every action had consequences, and he felt the responsibility heavily. He reviewed every note, every observation, every conversation he had had with people on the street. There was a rhythm to the movement of the suspects, patterns that repeated, small behaviors that indicated connections he had never imagined. It was organized, calculated, and deliberate. It wasn't just crime. It was a network that moved beneath the city's surface, and he knew it needed to be stopped. He started following the trail cautiously, knowing that even a small misstep could be dangerous. He would go to different neighborhoods, watch, listen, and take mental notes. He didn't make a show of his presence. To the people in the streets, he was just another officer doing his rounds. But his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the story that no one else seemed to see. Each interaction, each observation, became a piece of a puzzle that only he was trying to solve. One afternoon, he got a tip from a reliable source about a man who had been moving large amounts of money through different locations. The source was nervous, whispering over a phone call, but they trusted him enough to provide details. He scribbled them down, aware that the information was sensitive, that acting too quickly could compromise everything. He knew the law, the boundaries he had to maintain, but the temptation to act immediately was strong. It was the kind of feeling that made him restless, the kind of urge that had led him into difficult situations before. But this time, he reminded himself to plan, to calculate, to stay careful. He started surveillance, spending hours observing from a distance. He followed patterns, noted routines, and tried to understand the network's operations. The suspects were careful, methodical, and professional. They didn't make mistakes easily. He realized that confronting them directly could be extremely risky. But the thought of walking away and letting the network operate freely was unbearable. He had seen what unchecked crime could do, how it could spread like a disease, affecting everyone around it. That knowledge drove him forward, even when fear whispered in the back of his mind. The day started quietly, almost too quietly. He felt a tension in the air that was different from the usual buzz of the city. Something had shifted, and he couldn't ignore it. Over the past few weeks, his careful observations and daring actions had begun to draw attention. The network he had been monitoring was large and resourceful, and his interference, though unnoticed by some, had not gone entirely undetected. He could feel it in small changes, in the way people moved, in the subtle glances he caught while on patrol. There was a sense that eyes were watching, that something bigger than the streets was now aware of his presence. He continued his usual routines, patrolling neighborhoods, checking in with informants, observing patterns, But he also felt the weight of scrutiny. Every step he took, every decision had to be precise. One misstep could unravel everything. He became more cautious, more strategic, knowing that the network might have allies and that law enforcement at higher levels was starting to notice unusual activity. He had always known that the line between vigilance and danger was thin, but now he felt it acutely. Reports started coming in about unusual movements. People connected to the network were disappearing from usual locations, contacts became harder to reach, and small incidents of vandalism and intimidation started surfacing. The city had its usual chaos, but he could tell that these events were not random. The network was reacting, adjusting, and he was at the center of their attention. The sense of urgency intensified. It was no longer a simple investigation. It was a game of survival and strategy. Then came the call he had been dreading. Federal agents wanted to meet him. The FBI had noticed irregularities in operations he had been investigating. His actions, while effective, had crossed boundaries. They wanted to understand what he had done, what he had uncovered, and why. The thought of facing them made him uneasy. He had always respected federal law enforcement, but now he had to explain why he acted independently. The situation was serious, delicate, and potentially career-ending. He prepared himself carefully for the meeting, gathering evidence, organizing notes, and rehearsing explanations. When he arrived at the meeting, the agents were professional but intimidating. They had a way of making you feel the weight of the system, the authority that spanned the entire country. They asked questions, probing for details, for motivations, for any hint of misconduct. He explained what he had discovered, the methods he had used, and the reason for acting alone. He spoke honestly, carefully, knowing that truth was his strongest defense, but also aware that transparency could expose him to criticism and consequences. The conversation was tense, filled with pauses, notes being taken, and measured responses. He could feel the eyes on him, judging, weighing his credibility, his decisions, and his judgment. After the meeting, he walked back through the city streets, feeling a mixture of relief, for the city had changed in ways he couldn't ignore. He could feel it in the air, the streets, even in the faces of people he passed. There was tension everywhere, a sense of caution that hadn't been there before. Over the past weeks, his actions had set off a ripple effect. The network he had interfered with had grown more secretive, more aggressive, and more unpredictable. Every day brought new challenges, new risks, and new decisions that could not be taken lightly. He had become the focus of attention from multiple sides, and the consequences of his choices were becoming more apparent. His personal life was the first to show strain. Friends stopped calling as often, worried that he might be too deeply involved, too distracted by his work. Family members noticed the exhaustion etched into his features, the constant tension, the late nights that stretched into early mornings. Conversations became shorter, distracted and heavy with unspoken concern. He tried to reassure them, to explain that he was careful, that he had control, but he knew that the truth of the danger he faced couldn't be shared fully. The burden of secrecy weighed on him, isolating him in ways that the streets could not, that no patrol or investigation could prepare him for. On the streets, he continued his observations, now with more caution than ever. He noticed patterns in the network's movements, subtle signals of coordination that showed he was being watched. Vehicles parked in unusual locations, people lingering without reason, shadows that seemed to follow him. He realized that the network was aware of his interference, and their methods were becoming more sophisticated. The risk of confrontation increased with each passing day, and he had to be meticulous in planning every move. The line between vigilance and danger had blurred, and he felt the pressure of maintaining that balance constantly. He had also started noticing the reactions of other officers in his department. Some were supportive, quietly acknowledging his dedication, but others were skeptical, uneasy about his independent methods. Rumors began circulating about the unusual actions he had taken, actions that had produced results but had bypassed standard procedures. He understood the tension, the need for accountability, but he also knew that slowing down could allow the network to regain control, to act without interference. He was caught between loyalty to the law, responsibility to his community, and the practical need to act effectively. One night, he received a tip that a major transaction was about to take place at an abandoned building in the outskirts of the city. The information was credible but risky. Acting on it meant entering a situation that could be dangerous, but it also offered the potential to gather significant evidence. He prepared meticulously, planning escape routes, observing approaches, and analyzing the surroundings. He knew that every detail mattered, and that even the smallest misstep could have severe consequences. He reminded himself that patience in the final days of the operation were the most intense. He could feel the pressure building with every passing hour. The network was reacting faster now, more aggressively, and the presence of federal scrutiny added another layer of complication. Every movement he made had to be precise. Mistakes could not only compromise the investigation but also put his life at risk. He spent long nights planning, analyzing evidence, and predicting the network's next moves. He had reached a point where caution and decisiveness were both required, and any lapse could have far-reaching consequences. He began by reviewing every piece of information he had gathered over the weeks. The documents, the photographs, the recordings all painted a detailed picture of the network's operations. It wasn't just the flow of money or the coordination of minor crimes. It was a sophisticated system involving multiple people, locations, and methods designed to avoid detection. The realization of the network's reach made him aware that the stakes were higher than ever. The investigation had grown from a simple case into something that could have regional implications, and the decisions he made in the next days would determine both the outcome of the operation and his own fate. As he prepared for the next steps, he considered the personal cost of the work. His relationships had suffered, friends and family had grown distant, and the isolation was heavy. The constant pressure of being watched, both by the network and federal authorities, took a mental and emotional toll. Yet he reminded himself why he had undertaken this challenge: the safety of the city, the principle of justice, and the understanding that inaction could lead to harm. He drew strength from this purpose, knowing that courage often required endurance and sacrifice. He planned a final series of surveillance operations to ensure that every key member of the network and their movements were accounted for. Timing was crucial. Any misstep could alert them to his presence and undo weeks of careful work. He moved quietly through the city, observing patterns, noting anomalies, and recording everything in his mind and on secure devices. The city around him was alive with ordinary sounds, but he saw layers beneath the surface, connections and interactions that others could not perceive. He understood that the culmination of his work depended on recognizing these patterns and acting with precision. During one particularly tense night, he observed a meeting that brought together several important members of the network. The location was carefully chosen, a hidden warehouse on the edge of the city, and the group was unaware of his presence. He documented their interactions, movements, and the exchange of information and resources. Every detail was valuable, providing insight into their hierarchy, alliances, and methods. The evidence gathered during this surveillance would be critical in bringing the network to justice, but it also increased the danger he faced. He had to leave without leaving traces and without alerting the participants. In the following days, he reviewed the collected data thoroughly. He connected names, addresses, transactions, and interactions, building a detailed map of the network's operations. This information was crucial not only for understanding the immediate activities, but also for anticipating future actions and vulnerabilities. He shared parts of this information cautiously with federal agents, maintaining discretion to protect sensitive aspects of the investigation. The balance between cooperation and operational independence required careful judgment, and he navigated it with experience and awareness of the risks involved. The network, sensing disruption, began more overt actions to protect itself. Vehicles were damaged, properties were vandalized, and individuals associated with the investigation received threats. He noticed patterns of intimidation and subtle warnings aimed at him and others involved. The reality of the danger became undeniable. He understood that his bold actions had consequences beyond the immediate evidence gathering, and the challenge was to continue the investigation without provoking escalation that could lead to violence. Each decision now required careful consideration of both the immediate and long-term effects. He focused on mitigating risks while maintaining the momentum of the investigation. He adjusted his patterns, varied his routes, and increased the use of secure communications. He continued gathering evidence, documenting every interaction, and observing the network's adaptations. The delicate balance of caution, strategy, and action became his daily routine. He understood that success depended not only on courage and determination, but also on meticulous planning and awareness of the consequences of each move. The critical moment arrived when he had an opportunity to intercept a major operation of the network. He prepared thoroughly, considering escape routes, backup options, and timing. The operation required precise execution, patience, and attention to detail. Any misstep could have disastrous consequences, not just for him but for others involved. He moved carefully, following the plan he had developed over weeks of observation and analysis. The stakes were clear, and the pressure was immense. During the operation, he successfully intercepted key evidence that revealed the inner workings of the network. Documents, electronic records, and first-hand observations provided a comprehensive picture of the organization. He ensured that the evidence was secured, documented, and preserved. The operation was executed without direct confrontation, minimizing risk while achieving maximum impact. The success was a culmination of weeks of careful work, observation, and strategic thinking. It was a decisive moment, demonstrating the effectiveness of his independent actions, but also confirming that bold moves carried significant consequences. Following the operation, he reviewed the results, organized the evidence, and coordinated with federal agents for appropriate follow-up. The information he provided allowed authorities to take action against key members of the network, disrupting operations and initiating legal proceedings. He understood that his actions had initiated consequences that extended beyond his immediate control. The network was still present, but their capacity to act was reduced, and justice had been served to an extent that was tangible and measurable. The personal and professional consequences of his actions became clear in the aftermath. His methods had been questioned, his independence scrutinized, and his relationships affected. Yet the impact of the work he had done was undeniable. The city was safer. Critical elements of the network were dismantled, and evidence had been preserved to support legal proceedings. He reflected on the cost, the tension, and the risks he had taken, acknowledging both the successes and the challenges that came with acting independently in a complex and dangerous environment. He also experienced a sense of resolution. While the path had been fraught with danger, uncertainty, and personal sacrifice, he had fulfilled the responsibilities he had taken upon himself. The balance between courage and caution, independence and accountability, had been tested and ultimately proven effective. He understood that the consequences of crossing powerful organizations and legal boundaries were significant, but he had navigated them with awareness, strategy, and commitment to justice. In the following weeks, the city returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the impact of the investigation remained. Law enforcement continued to monitor activities, legal proceedings were underway, and the community had benefited from the reduced influence of the network. He resumed more routine duties, though the experience had changed him. He carried with him a heightened awareness of risk, responsibility, and the delicate balance required in law enforcement. The lessons learned were profound, highlighting the cost of action, the complexity of justice, and the importance of courage tempered with prudence. He took moments to reflect on the journey, the decisions made, and the consequences faced. Each action, each choice, had contributed to the outcome, shaping not only the investigation but his personal growth and understanding of the challenges inherent in maintaining law and order. The experience reinforced the idea that effective action required not only skill and determination, but also careful planning, awareness of context, and a commitment to ethical responsibility. He recognized the limits of individual action, the importance of collaboration, and the need to navigate the interplay between independence and oversight. Ultimately, the story concluded with a sense of both achievement and caution. The network had been disrupted, key evidence secured, and justice served, but the journey had highlighted the risks of crossing powerful entities and operating beyond conventional boundaries. He emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of the consequences of bold action, the weight of responsibility, and the delicate balance required to act effectively in complex high-stakes situations. And as he continued his duties, he carried with him the lessons learned, aware that each decision, each observation, and each action held the potential to shape outcomes in profound ways. Precision were as important as courage in situations like this. The night of the operation, he arrived early, observing the building from a safe distance. Shadows moved inside, and he could hear faint noises that confirmed activity. He remained hidden, taking note of entrances, exits, and the movements of individuals inside. The tension was high. Every decision, every breath had weight. He waited for the right moment, knowing that acting too soon could alert the network and acting too late could mean missing a critical opportunity. He felt the familiar mix of adrenaline and focus, the same feeling that had driven him through countless investigations. Finally, a moment presented itself. One of the network members left a side door unlocked for a brief period. He moved quickly, entering the building with caution. Inside, he observed the layout, the activity, and the items of interest. Documents, cash, and equipment were scattered, evidence of the organization and planning behind the network's operations. He documented everything carefully, taking photographs, notes, and memorizing details that could not be recorded directly. The operation was delicate, requiring precision and awareness, but he moved confidently, guided by experience and intuition. During the operation, he noticed a person he had seen in previous surveillance, someone whose role had been unclear. Their presence indicated higher-level involvement in the network. He paid close attention, recording movements and interactions, realizing that the information could be crucial for understanding the hierarchy and connections within the organization. Every observation added pieces to a puzzle that was slowly coming together, revealing the depth and sophistication of the network. The operation concluded without direct confrontation, but he knew that the network would eventually realize that their activities had been compromised. He left carefully, ensuring no traces were left behind. The evidence he had gathered was valuable, but it also increased the danger he faced. He understood that the network would respond, that they would adapt, and that the pressure on him would intensify. The stakes were higher than ever, and he had to remain vigilant, strategic, and cautious. In the following days, he analyzed the evidence in detail. Connections, transactions, and relationships became clearer. He mapped out patterns, identifying key players, influential locations, and potential vulnerabilities. The depth of the network's operations became apparent, and he realized that the situation was larger and more dangerous than he had first imagined. The challenge was not only to gather evidence, but also to anticipate the network's reactions and plan accordingly. Each step had to be deliberate, measured, and strategic. He also felt the impact on his mental state. The constant pressure, the awareness of danger, and the isolation weighed heavily. Sleep was difficult, and moments of relaxation were rare. He carried the burden of responsibility for both the investigation and his personal safety. He reminded himself why he had taken on this challenge, why he had acted independently despite the risks. The city depended on him, and he understood that sometimes courage required enduring discomfort and uncertainty. Interactions with colleagues became more complex. Some offered cautious support, acknowledging the results he had achieved, while others questioned his methods, concerned about the legality and oversight of his actions. He navigated these dynamics carefully, maintaining professionalism while continuing his independent observations. The balance between collaboration and autonomy was delicate, requiring tact, discretion, and awareness of the broader implications of his choices. The network's response became more evident over time. He noticed subtle signs of intimidation aimed at people connected to the investigation. Vehicles were damaged, properties vandalized, and threats left in discreet ways. The message was clear. The network was aware of his interference, and they were willing to act to protect their operations. The danger was real, persistent, and escalating. He adjusted his strategies accordingly, increasing surveillance, securing evidence, and planning contingencies. Each action required careful consideration, awareness of consequences, and readiness to respond if confronted. A particularly tense moment occurred when he observed a meeting between network members and external associates. The gathering was organized, deliberate, and held in a location chosen for privacy. He watched from a distance, noting interactions, movements, and signals. The information gained from this observation was significant, revealing alliances, influence, and operational strategies. He documented the meeting meticulously, understanding that these details could be pivotal in dismantling parts of the network. The risk of being discovered was high, but the potential reward for justice outweighed the danger. He continued his work with caution, aware that each action now had consequences beyond his immediate environment. Federal oversight remained a factor, adding pressure and complexity to every decision. He had to balance effectiveness with legality, caution with initiative, and independence with accountability. The constant awareness of risk shaped his actions, decisions, and strategies, making him vigilant, deliberate, and focused on both short-term objectives and long-term outcomes. As the investigation progressed, he noticed the personal toll becoming more pronounced. Isolation, tension, and the demands of continuous vigilance affected his interactions, energy, and focus. Yet he persisted, driven by commitment, responsibility, and the belief that his work could prevent harm, protect the community, and dismantle dangerous operations. Each observation, each document collected, and each strategic move was part of a larger effort to achieve justice and maintain safety in the city. The turning point came when he identified a critical vulnerability in the network's operations. A pattern emerged, a flaw in their coordination, offering an opportunity to intervene decisively. He planned carefully, considering timing, approach, and potential risks. The operation required precision, patience, and awareness of multiple factors. The implications were significant. Success could expose key elements of the network, while failure could result in retaliation and danger. He prepared meticulously, analyzing every detail, anticipating reactions, and ensuring readiness for unexpected developments. The execution of the operation was tense and methodical. He moved quietly, observing, documenting, and acting strategically. The evidence gathered was substantial, providing insight into the network's structure, influence, and key players. He left the location carefully, avoiding detection, and returned to review and analyze the findings. The results were significant, demonstrating the impact of his independent actions while also highlighting the risks involved. The success reinforced his belief in careful planning, observation, and decisive action, but also reminded him of the constant vigilance required to navigate complex and dangerous situations. Throughout these events, he maintained focus on the broader mission, protecting the community, gathering evidence, and dismantling dangerous operations. The balance between risk and responsibility, independence and oversight, courage and caution was delicate, requiring constant awareness, judgment, and adaptability. Each step taken, each decision made, contributed to the unfolding narrative of accountability, justice, and consequence. And as he prepared for the next phase, he knew that the choices he made would shape not only the investigation's outcome, but also his own path, his safety, and the impact of crossing lines that few dared to cross, and apprehension. He had explained himself, but the reality was that federal scrutiny had been added to the network's attention. He now had to navigate more carefully, knowing that every action could be examined under a microscope. The stakes were higher than ever. His instincts told him that the network would act, that they would not let his interference go unanswered. And he knew that the law, while a shield, also had boundaries that could limit his freedom to act. Days turned into weeks and tension mounted. He noticed small changes, surveillance of his own movements, strange cars parked in familiar areas, shadows that seemed to follow him. He realized that he was being watched, both by the network and by federal authorities. Every step he took required careful thought. The city's familiar streets felt different now, filled with hidden dangers and unseen eyes. His work, once straightforward, had become a delicate balance of observation, strategy, and caution. Each decision had ripple effects that could reach far beyond his immediate surroundings. Meanwhile, the network began to make more aggressive moves. Small acts of intimidation targeted people connected to him or to the investigation. He witnessed vandalized cars, threats left in notes, and subtle warnings meant to unsettle him. He understood the messages clearly: back off or face consequences. But backing off was not in his nature. He had seen too much, learned too much, and believed that leaving the network unchecked would only allow more harm to spread. The challenge was to respond without escalating to a point where lives could be endangered or legal repercussions could destroy him. He decided to increase his observation. He worked discreetly, analyzing the network's activities, looking for weaknesses, and planning strategic interventions. He avoided confrontation whenever possible, focusing on evidence gathering and surveillance. He also started documenting every incident, every movement, and every interaction meticulously, knowing that these records could be crucial in explaining his actions to both his department and federal authorities. The careful balance of caution and action became his daily focus. The personal toll was beginning to show. His relationships, once strong, became strained. Friends noticed his absence, his distracted demeanor, and the late nights. Conversations became brief, distracted, and his family worried about his safety. He tried to reassure them, but he knew that he couldn't fully share the risks or the depth of the investigation. The isolation was heavy, and sometimes he wondered if he had taken on too much, if the burden was more than one person could bear. But he reminded himself of why he was doing it, of the potential lives at stake, and of the principle that sometimes courage required endurance. Then came a critical incident. He observed the network moving a significant amount of money through an unexpected route. It was risky, but he decided to intercept the evidence without confrontation. He prepared carefully, studied the surroundings, and waited for the right moment. When the opportunity came, he acted swiftly, securing documents and recording movements without being noticed. The operation was successful, but he knew it would not go unnoticed forever. The network would realize that their operations had been compromised, and the attention on him would intensify. This was the reality of crossing powerful, organized criminal forces. Each success came with increased danger. The aftermath of the interception was immediate. He noticed more surveillance, more subtle warnings, and an atmosphere of unease in the areas he frequented. It became clear that both the network and federal authorities were now watching him closely. His position had shifted from an observer to a participant in a complex and dangerous game. He had acted boldly, effectively, but now the consequences were unavoidable. Every move had to be calculated, every interaction carefully managed. Mistakes could be catastrophic. As he navigated the city, he reflected on the choices he had made. The line between duty and recklessness had blurred. He understood that while his actions had produced results, they had also exposed him to scrutiny and danger. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just for the investigation, but for the people who might be affected by the network's retaliation. Each decision was a balance of risk and necessity, a delicate dance between action and restraint. He knew that the next steps would define the outcome of this dangerous pursuit. Pressure from all sides began to mount. Federal agents requested updates, asked for reports, and demanded explanations for every action he had taken. He complied, knowing that transparency was necessary, but he also protected sensitive details that could compromise the investigation or put him at risk. The network, meanwhile, grew more cautious but increasingly aggressive, testing boundaries, observing reactions, and signaling that his interference had been noticed. The tension was palpable, a constant undercurrent in every step he took, every decision he made. One night, he received an anonymous tip that a key figure in the network had changed locations. The information was vague but credible, and he knew that acting on it required careful planning. He prepared, considering options, escape routes, and backup possibilities. He realized that every action now could trigger a chain reaction, affecting multiple people and events. The stakes were higher than ever, and the margin for error was minimal. But he was committed, driven by a sense of duty, justice, and the belief that inaction could lead to far worse consequences. As he moved to follow the lead, he felt the weight of observation from unseen eyes. The network was adapting, responding to his previous actions. Federal scrutiny added another layer of complexity, a constant reminder that legality and authority were always present, even in moments of independence. He had to balance effectiveness with caution, ambition with responsibility. Each decision was a careful calculation, each movement considered in the broader context of risk and outcome. The situation reached a critical juncture when he uncovered evidence linking the network to multiple high-level crimes across the city. The implications were enormous. This was no longer a local issue. It had regional and potentially national significance. He documented everything meticulously, understanding that the evidence could dismantle the network, but also aware that it could make him a target. The realization weighed heavily, a reminder that bold actions came with consequences, and that crossing paths with powerful institutions and organized criminals was never without risk. He spent hours reviewing the evidence, planning next steps and considering contingencies. Each piece of information, each observation, and each interaction was analyzed for potential impact. The network was still active, still dangerous, and still aware of his presence. Federal oversight was a constant, a layer of accountability that complicated decisions and added pressure. He understood that the coming days would be defining, that the actions he chose next could determine not only the outcome of the investigation but also his career, safety, and future. Through it all, he remained committed, aware that the choices he had made had set in motion events that could not be undone. He had crossed lines, taken bold actions, and faced scrutiny, but his focus remained on the ultimate goal: justice, accountability, and protection for the city he had sworn to serve. And as he prepared for the challenges ahead, he knew that the balance of courage, caution, and integrity would determine not only his success but also the consequences of crossing forces far more powerful than he had ever faced. Nighttime became his ally. The city's shadows hid him as he moved quietly, observing without being seen. He learned their schedules, noticed small meetings, brief exchanges, and subtle signals. Each moment added to the map in his mind, a mental image of how the network functioned. It was like watching a complex machine in motion, parts moving in synchronization, and he was the only one trying to understand its inner workings. The deeper he went, the more he realized how careful he had to be, and the higher the stakes became. He also started noticing connections to other incidents that had seemed random before. A theft in one part of the city, a vandalized car in another, a brief altercation in a narrow alley, all pieces of the same story. His ability to connect these dots was something he had honed over years of work on the streets. But he also knew that others might not understand his approach, might see it as reckless. That thought made him cautious yet determined. He was aware that if he acted too boldly, he could face consequences from his own department or worse, from federal authorities who had jurisdiction over larger criminal activities. One evening, he made a risky decision. He followed a suspect to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was abandoned, the kind of place people avoided after dark. He parked a distance away and watched silently. Shadows moved inside, and he realized that this was a key location for their operations. He considered calling backup, but worried that alerting the authorities too soon could cause the network to vanish without a trace. He made the decision to watch alone, careful not to intervene yet, learning everything he could. It was dangerous, yes, but he felt it was necessary. Inside the warehouse, the suspects were handling large sums of money and documents. He observed quietly, memorizing faces, routines, and details. He saw evidence of organized operations, more sophisticated than he had initially thought. The realization that he was on the verge of uncovering something significant made his heart beat faster, but he stayed composed. He knew that excitement could lead to mistakes, and mistakes here could be fatal. Every breath, every step, every movement mattered as he maintained his hidden position. He continued surveillance over several nights. Each observation added pieces to his mental picture of the network. He learned about alliances, rivalries, and the flow of resources. The suspects were unaware of his watchful presence, confident in their routines, which allowed him to gather critical insights. But the more he learned, the more dangerous it became. He knew that someone in the network might eventually notice discrepancies or patterns that didn't fit, and he had to remain vigilant. The tension in these moments was constant, a reminder that he was playing a high-stakes game without official clearance. His patience started to pay off when he noticed a mistake, a moment of carelessness from one of the suspects. It was subtle, a hand left in the wrong place, a signal misunderstood, but enough to reveal a connection he had been seeking. He documented it carefully, taking mental notes and planning the next steps. He was aware that this could be the breakthrough that would expose the network, but it also increased the risk. Acting on it too soon could jeopardize everything. He spent hours thinking, weighing the options and deciding how to proceed. It was a delicate balance of urgency and caution. He also began to feel the weight of isolation. His colleagues didn't know the full extent of what he was doing, and he couldn't share details without compromising the investigation. He couldn't involve the FBI yet, as the network's operations fell partially outside their immediate jurisdiction, and he didn't want to alert the suspects prematurely. The solitude was heavy, but he found strength in his purpose. He reminded himself of the people in the city who depended on law enforcement, the lives that could be affected by crime, and the principle that justice sometimes required patience and courage. The turning point came when he observed a suspect transferring documents to a secure location. This was more than money. It was information that could expose the structure and operations of the entire network. He realized that this was the moment to act, to gather evidence that could not be ignored. He prepared carefully, planning his approach to ensure he could capture the information without confrontation. It required precise timing, observation, and careful maneuvering. The stakes were higher than ever, but the potential impact made the risk worth it. He waited for the right moment, watching, analyzing, and predicting the suspect's movements. Finally, the opportunity arrived. The suspect left the area briefly, giving him the chance to access what had been left behind. He moved swiftly, carefully documenting and collecting evidence without leaving traces. Every step was deliberate, methodical, and precise. He understood the gravity of what he was doing. This action could change the trajectory of the investigation, expose the network, and possibly put him in danger if discovered. After the operation, he returned home exhausted but exhilarated. He had succeeded in obtaining critical information that could dismantle part of the network, but he knew that this would draw attention. The act was bold, risky, and could have significant consequences. He reflected on the situation, aware that crossing this line, taking independent action without authorization, was not without danger. Yet he felt a sense of resolve. The decision to act, to intervene, and to pursue justice despite the risks was a defining moment for him. It was the first hit that could have huge consequences, setting in motion events that he could not yet predict. He spent the following days reviewing the evidence, cross-referencing names, locations, and transactions. The information painted a detailed picture of the network, its operations, and key players. He understood that he now held something powerful, something that could bring both justice and danger. The realization weighed heavily, knowing that one misstep could have far-reaching consequences. The balance between effectiveness and caution was delicate, and he had to navigate it carefully. Throughout this time, he remained vigilant. He observed reactions in the streets, noticed unusual behaviors, and continued monitoring the network. He was aware that the suspects might notice anomalies, might adapt their operations, and that he could become a target. Yet he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the work he was doing mattered. The city depended on those willing to take responsibility, to act when necessary, and to pursue truth even in the face of uncertainty. His focus never wavered, his determination unwavering. Each decision, each observation, each risk taken was part of a larger mission to prevent harm, to dismantle the network, and to ensure safety in the city. He understood that this was more than a job. It was a responsibility, a duty, and a test of character. And as he prepared for the next phase, he knew that his actions had set events in motion that could change everything. For him, for the city, and for the people whose lives hung in the balance. Calmness in the chaos told him this was not just a random act. He felt a familiar pull, the kind that drove him to dig deeper when others might have moved on. This was the part of the job he loved, the detective work, piecing together the puzzle from small clues. After leaving the store, he continued his patrol. The streets had their usual rhythm, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene, the gestures, the words. He had grown up in this city, had seen it change and grow, and he knew its patterns. Crime had its habits, its signatures, and he had learned to recognize them. As he drove, he noticed a few faces he had seen before, known to him from previous cases. They didn't seem involved this time, but his attention to detail never allowed him to ignore anyone entirely. He made mental notes, connections, and started forming a plan for how to follow the lead without drawing unnecessary attention. Later that day, he met with a fellow officer at a local diner, a place where they often shared information over coffee. The conversation started casually, about families, the weather, the slow shift of the seasons, but soon they moved to work. He mentioned the robbery, the suspect, and his suspicions. His colleague listened, skeptical but respectful. They both knew the city had a way of surprising you, and experience had taught them to trust instincts even if it meant bending the usual procedures. They talked strategy, who to watch, what connections to check, and the potential risks. Even in casual conversations, the weight of responsibility was never far from his mind. Each decision could affect lives, not just his own, but the people he served. As night fell, the city transformed. Lights reflected off wet streets from an earlier rain, and the sounds changed, softer, but somehow more intense. He walked his beat, observing, listening, noting anything unusual. He knew these hours were critical. Crimes often happened when people let their guard down. He saw groups of people moving through the streets, some laughing, some arguing quietly. He watched interactions, subtle gestures, body language, and noted individuals who didn't belong or seemed out of place. To him, these details mattered. They were pieces of a larger story he needed to understand. Around midnight, a tip came in about a suspected gang member seen near a warehouse on the edge of town. The area was notorious: abandoned buildings, narrow alleys, and little lighting. Most officers avoided it, but he felt compelled to investigate. He arrived cautiously, car parked out of sight, observing from a distance. Shadows moved, a few figures talking quietly, and he realized he might have stumbled onto something significant. His heart rate quickened, not out of fear but anticipation. This was the part of policing he thrived on, the chance to prevent something before it escalated. He made a careful approach, noting escape routes, potential threats, and cover points. He stayed hidden, recording observations, making mental notes, and assessing the situation. He noticed behaviors, small interactions that suggested hierarchy, tension, and coordination. This was not casual loitering. This was organized. He felt a mixture of excitement and caution. He was aware that any wrong move could escalate quickly, and yet he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. Responsibility drove him forward, the sense that someone had to be there, watching, understanding. Hours passed, and he had gathered information, patterns, and potential leads. He knew that sharing too much too soon could compromise the investigation, but he also couldn't do it alone forever. He decided to document everything, careful not to leave traces that could alert those he was observing. His actions were meticulous, disciplined, guided by experience and intuition. By the time he left, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in muted colors, signaling another day beginning. He returned to his apartment exhausted but alert, aware that sleep would be brief, and thoughts of the case would follow him. Over the next days, he continued piecing together small incidents, comparing them with past cases, noticing overlaps and contradictions. He made trips to the neighborhoods, visited contacts, and spoke with informants cautiously. Each conversation revealed fragments of information, tiny hints that seemed insignificant alone but meaningful together. He learned patience, the kind of patience only honed by years on the streets, by watching the city breathe and shift, understanding that not all actions were immediate, and sometimes the truth revealed itself slowly. He also saw the human side of the city, the struggles of ordinary people caught in the middle of crime and survival. He helped a family whose home had been broken into, reassured a shop owner worried about repeated thefts, and spoke with teenagers at risk of joining gangs. These moments grounded him, reminded him why he chose this path, why despite the danger he stayed committed to his role. It wasn't about glory but responsibility, about being the line between chaos and order, however fragile that line might be. One evening, a lead came in about a suspect who had been moving quickly through the city, leaving traces small but noticeable. He tracked movements, followed patterns, pieced together connections, and realized this was bigger than he had first assumed. The suspect was not alone. There was a network, organized, careful, and dangerous. He knew that confronting them directly could be risky, but ignoring it wasn't an option. His instincts told him that the situation required precision, intelligence, and timing. He began planning carefully, considering what actions to take, how to gather more evidence, and how to stay within the bounds of the law while still being effective. He knew he couldn't act recklessly. One mistake could ruin everything, but the urgency of the threat, the lives at stake, and the need for justice pushed him forward. Every step, every observation, every small action mattered. He relied on his training, experience, and a deep understanding of human behavior to anticipate what might happen next. Late one night, he reviewed his notes, maps, and recordings, laying out everything he had learned. The connections, patterns, and inconsistencies painted a picture of an operation larger than anyone in his department had realized. He understood the stakes now, and that knowledge brought a mix of determination and unease. He had crossed a line in his thinking. He could no longer see this as routine. This was serious, dangerous, and consequential. And yet he felt a sense of resolve, a commitment to follow through no matter what it took. He knew that the next steps would define everything, the choices he made, the risks he took, and the actions he pursued. The city slept, unaware of the quiet, methodical work happening in its shadows. And he, the cop on the beat, felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. He understood that in this line of work, one hit, one decision, one action, could ripple through lives, careers, and destinies. And he was ready as anyone could be to face whatever came next, knowing that every moment, every observation, every choice mattered in ways that could change everything.